Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the camera is Nicole Letson, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. Before we get rolling though, I want to give a big thank you to everyone who has liked our videos and subscribed to the TCGplayer channel over the past year. We just crossed 100,000 subs, which means my autograph is now going to cost you at least $5, but you can all say you knew me before the fame went to my head. Today, we're taking a look at the life and story of the vampire planeswalker Sorin Markov, as requested by Brandon Stevens, 2B or not 2B, and everyone who watched What's Happening in War of the Spark and asked about his battle with Nahiri, which we will get to, but first, who is Sorin? Where did he come from? And can we get Gary Oldman to play him in a Magic movie someday? Nicole just reminded me that Gary Oldman already played Dracula. I'm not sure if that helps or hurts us here. Okay then, Keanu Reeves, I guess. He what? Anyway, on to the cards. Sorin Markov first appeared in the set Zendikar, where it was immediately established he was a very, very black character. I want to stress though, that doesn't mean he's evil. Selfish and immoral maybe, but not necessarily evil. In fact, the whole reason he was on Zendikar was to try and seal up the Eldrazi, who had started to break free of the bonds he placed them in thousands of years prior. So maybe I should back up a bit. I happen to have the Markov family photo album here, and yes, here we go. Sorin's grandfather was a man named Edgar Markov. They lived on the plane of Innistrad, and the year is, it doesn't say, I don't know. It's a long time ago. Edgar has a problem. Food is running out, and he's an alchemist, not a farmer. But it's not like he can turn mercury into corn. So he ends up listening to one of Innistrad's many demons who guides him to the secrets of sangromancy. That's a sort of blood magic, and it makes Edgar the first true vampire of Innistrad. He shares this gift with his children and grandson. Here's Sorin, young and mortal, accepting the blood tribute, which will make him immortal. This gift has unexpected consequences. The trauma of the transformation ritual ignites Sorin's spark, and he becomes a planeswalker. The next several hundred pages of the photo album are missing, but we do know that in that time, Sorin explored many, many planes and managed to make, at least 2 friends. Those would be Ugin and Nahiri. Ugin is a dragon from Dominaria and the twin brother of Nicol Bolas. Nahiri is a lithomancer from Zendikar, and her powers let her make weapons and tools out of stone. Now, obviously, at first glance, Sorin has nothing in common with these people, so we have to ask ourselves, what are they doing together? The answer is the Eldrazi. Now, we've talked about them before in another video, so to keep things moving, I'll just say Ugin, Nahiri, and Sorin agreed to work together to contain the Eldrazi threat. Remember, at this point in the story, Sorin is a purely black character, so why would he do something that benefits the entire multiverse? The answer is quite simple. He lives there. And so, thousands of years ago, the 3 created a prison for the Eldrazi on the plane of Zendikar, which brings us back to where we started, more or less. Thanks to some scheming by Nicol Bolas, the Eldrazi were eventually released. Sorin returned to Zendikar after being away for thousands of years to try and tidy things back up, but his friends Nahiri and Ugin weren't with him this time. Instead, he ran into Nissa and tried to get her help in restoring the prison. Oh, but she blew it, which is a story for another time. Sorin decides to wash his hands of the whole thing and go back home to Innistrad, where he had spent considerable time putting magical barriers in place to isolate and protect his home plane. First, though, he appeared on a handful of cards in M12, where he acted like a brutal edgelord, which I can forgive. A lot of characters in Magic at that point were pretty one-note and didn't really have any sort of arc to them yet. But that actually changes for Sorin pretty quick. His next card was Sorin, Lord of Innistrad, which added white to his color identity, and we learned how much of an impact he's had on his home plane over the millennia. Turns out most of the other vampires there pretty much hate him, for starters. You see, Sorin realized that dear old granddad Edgar didn't truly fix the problem of having no food. He just shoved it off into the future. His vampire family would just feed on the humans of Innistrad until there were none left, and then they'd have to turn on each other. To prevent this inevitability, Sorin took it upon himself to give the humans a protector in the form of Avacyn, a literal guardian angel. Her job was to make it hard for the vampires to feast upon the humans, which of course made the vampires very upset with Sorin. So this explains the white that has been added to Sorin's previously mono-black personality. In Magic, white is the color all about following rules and having an order to things, and is usually the exact opposite of black, which believes in doing whatever is best for themselves, rules be damned. What Sorin did for Innistrad was basically laid down the law in saying vampires may not feast unchecked upon humans, which would be a selfless white thing to do, but his reasons were quite selfish. He didn't want his own tribe to run out of food. This will kind of become Sorin's hallmark over the following years, doing the right thing, but for personal reasons, not altruistic ones. Even sealing away the Eldrazi was just because he didn't want to have to deal with them ever reaching his own home, not to help anyone else. I've got another example. Our first visit to Innistrad also gave us the Hell Vault, an artifact made by Sorin and used to imprison some of the plane's most dangerous threats. Now, the story of the set focused on the Hell Vault being broken open to release Avacyn, who had fallen in during her fight with a demon named Grizzlebrand, but unknown to us at the time, another key figure was also trapped inside. That would be Nahiri, Sorin's former partner in helping stop the Eldrazi. I admit the timeline of this gets a little confusing, so try and stay with me here. Long ago, Sorin and Nahiri worked with Ugin to contain the Eldrazi. When that was done, it was agreed that Nahiri would stay on Zendikar to watch over things, but Sorin and Ugin would come back if there was ever trouble. At some point, many years later, the Eldrazi nearly did almost escape, and Nahiri sent a signal to Ugin and Sorin for help. Neither came to her aid, so she fixed things herself, then went looking for her friends. Unknown to her, Ugin was dead after falling to Nicol Bolas in the skies of Tarkir, but she did find Sorin alive and well on Innistrad. Nahiri confronted Sorin and asked why he didn't respond to her distress call. And he claimed he never even got it, most likely because it was blocked by the magical barriers he put up around the plane, as well as the absorbing properties of the Hell Vault. Nahiri is not happy with that answer, and Sorin points out she was able to solve the problem without his help anyway, so does it even really matter? This is a fundamental conflict expressed through the colors of Magic. Nahiri was a pure white character at this point, and she believed that their agreement was binding and should be followed above all else. Those were the rules upon which they all agreed, right? Meanwhile, Sorin, who is mono-black here, believes that as long as the outcome was desirable, the path to get there didn't really matter so much. He acknowledges he made a promise, but his own personal commitments to Innistrad were more important, and thus, he didn't feel guilty about leaving Nahiri to her own methods. This disagreement led to a full-blown fight, with Sorin ultimately putting Nahiri into the Hell Vault. Now we can argue if that was justified or not, but we have to agree it was an especially twisted form of punishment because Sorin kind of stole the Hell Vault design from Nahiri's own work on the Hedrons of Zendikar. A quick refresher, to trap the Eldrazi on Zendikar, Ugin designed a matrix of floating stones inscribed with magical runes. Those stones, called Hedrons, were created and positioned by Nahiri using her Lithomancer powers. Sorin watched all of this and learned enough to create his own crude version of a Hedron, the Hellvault. So, to seal Nahiri, a former friend and ally, inside a stone prison that she inspired was a really dick move. Well, there goes my PG rating on this one. Nahiri languished inside that rock for a very long time, finally getting released during the events of Avacyn Restored technically, but it happened off screen, so we didn't know that at the time. It would be a few years before we got that missing detail, in fact. First, Sorin had to travel to Tarkir, where he searched for Ugin, and if you thought that the timeline for all this was already confusing, I have some bad news for you. Sorin arrives on Tarkir and creates a sort of thrall guide out of a warrior native to the plane. We can see this depicted on Sorin's guide from his M20 Planeswalker deck. In the original timeline, Sorin has a bitter revelation as he comes across the remains of the dead dragon Ugin. In the new timeline created by Sarkhan, Sorin instead finds the haven of the spirit dragon, where Ugin was alive, but recovering from his battle with Nicol Bolas. The two chat, and Sorin tells Ugin that while he was out, some Eldrazi may have maybe gotten loose on Zendikar again. Ugin takes it pretty well and says, well, go get Nahiri and we can fix this like we did last time. And this is where Sorin reminds everyone why he's still a black-aligned character at his core. He asks Ugin if it's crucial Nahiri be there, and Ugin tells him, yeah, of course, any chance of stopping the Eldrazi absolutely depends on her. Rather than admit that he's had her locked up in the Hellvault for hundreds of years, Sorin plays dumb and promises to go look for her. So given the opportunity to confess his mistake and tell Ugin the truth, Sorin tries to act like they don't even need her, and finding her will be this big chore. For me personally, this is Sorin's lowest point because it shows that he's learned nothing from not showing remorse with Nahiri when she confronted him about not answering the distress call all those years ago. Now, he's making the exact same mistake again, trying to downplay his own failures to someone who's supposed to be his friend and ally. At some point, this is all going to catch up with Sorin, and the worst part is, he won't even be the one to really suffer for it. Rather than go look for Nahiri, Sorin goes home to Innistrad, planning to, Netflix and chill, I guess, when he finds that Markov Manor has been turned inside out, like one of those paper fortune teller things we all made in 4th grade. It seems Nahiri has come looking for him, and she is wicked pissed about being locked in that Hellvault for hundreds of years. Her declaration in stone is a warning sign to Sorin that things are only going to get worse from here. Nahiri goes on a rampage and starts to turn the whole plane against Sorin. She destroys buildings, she rallies the peasants, but more importantly, she manages to turn Avacyn against the people she was supposed to protect. Sorin realizes defeating Nahiri is going to require help, so he turns to the other vampires. Now, remember, most of them absolutely hate Sorin because he created Avacyn, who was a real pain in their neck for the last couple thousand years. Vampire neck. It's funny. Even though every vampire on Innistrad can trace their heritage back to Edgar Markov, they have since splintered into different houses and bloodlines. The Voldarans live in the more secluded regions of the plane, so they had been least impacted by Nahiri so far, and had plenty of fresh troops Sorin could use to fight with her. Their leader, Olivia Voldaran, only demanded that Sorin destroy Avacyn before her bloodline would help in the fight against Nahiri. Sorin is left with no choice but to unmake Avacyn, and that's when things get really bad, because without the Angel's protective magic and without the Hellvault to block signals across the plane, Nahiri is able to bring the Eldrazi right to Sorin's doorstep. She creates cryptoliths all over Innistrad, which are twisted versions of her iconic Hedrons. They channel the plane's ley lines so that they act as a beacon for Emrakul, recently released back on Zendikar. This gets us into Eldritch Moon, where Nahiri's wrath reaches its peak, and Sorin and Olivia begin their campaign of vengeance, and try to save what's left of the now Eldrazi-infested plane. Lucky for them, the Gatewatch actually does most of the heavy lifting, and we've got a video that covers their heroics, so you can go check that one out if you haven't already. Sorin and Nahiri meet face to face on the battlefield and hold nothing back. Everything Sorin has done so far in life has been to protect Innistrad from befalling a fate just like this, so he is understandably pissed. Nahiri, meanwhile, feels she was taken advantage of after her own home plane was used as a prison for the Eldrazi, and then she was ignored when she asked for help putting them back into stasis. Who's in the right here? That's for you guys to discuss in the comments. All I know is the people of Innistrad had to suffer the most, and that's really not fair to them. They didn't do anything. So I personally think Nahiri went a little overboard, even though, like I said earlier, Sorin had multiple chances to stop things from ever getting this far. So I guess they're both to blame, in my opinion. Anyway, the two battle it out, and in the end, Nahiri gets the upper hand just long enough to partially enclose Sorin inside a stone wall. The pain and pressure prevent him from being able to planeswalk out, but his own healing factor keeps him alive, at least for the time being. Nahiri planeswalks away, believing Innistrad will be destroyed by Emrakul and leaving Sorin with a front row seat for the end of his world. Olivia uses this opportunity to crown herself Lord of Innistrad, and she forms a temporary truce with the humans on the plane as they work together to purge the remaining Eldrazi invaders. We didn't hear a peep out of Sorin or Nahiri for almost 3 years, until TCGplayer got to reveal that both would be showing up in War of the Spark. The two continued their battle as the interplanar beacon drew them to Ravnica and the immortal sun kept them trapped there. Eventually, they stopped going at each other long enough to help defeat Nicol Bolas in the final push. But they both vanished again at the conclusion of that story, leaving us with more questions than answers. How did Sorin get out of his predicament on Innistrad? What had Nahiri been doing for the last 3 years? Ugin was also present on Ravnica. Why didn't he tell them to cut it out? Alas, it might be a while before we get the answer to these questions. Even with Sorin appearing again in Core Set 2020, there's no story attached to that. And the card seems to depict him from a time well before Nahiri even arrived on Innistrad. So, I want to try something a little different as we wrap up this episode of Magic Arcanum. I'm going to call this segment, you know what, it doesn't even have a name yet, but you can vote for one over on our Twitter, I guess. Okay, so I asked Nicole what information should definitely be in this video, and here are her top 9 questions. Number 1, what makes Sorin different from other vampires? That is a good one. Okay. So even though many planes in Magic have vampires, their origins are all different. On Innistrad, we know that vampires originated from Edgar Markov, performing some experiments under the guidance of a demon. I'm not really clear whatever happened to Edgar himself, though. The card Chosen of Markov suggests humans on Innistrad can all become vampires, presumably by being bitten but not killed, which fits with common vampire mythology. But on other planes, vampires seem to be undead, and the rules on if they can carry a spark are somewhat murky. The vampires on Innistrad, though, are considered cursed, not undead, and so Sorin is pretty unique in that regard, and he's the only known vampire planeswalker. Number 2, are there more Markovs, or was that manor it? Nahiri's primary target was Markov Manor, Sorin's family home. I would expect most, but not all, of the Markov bloodline to live there, and thus most, but not all, were killed when Nahiri assaulted the place. Number 3, what's his huge beef with Nahiri? To be fair, I did not tell Nicole I was going to read these questions verbatim. She's usually an eloquent communicator. Anyway, Nahiri is mostly angry with Sorin for failing to respond to her distress call when the Eldrazi broke free on Zendikar, even though she was able to put them back in jail herself. She seemed even more angry that Sorin refused to apologize after the fact, and then she spent a long time inside the Hell Vault where she was surrounded by some really horrible creatures. So that kind of drove her insane over, the years. When she got out, all she could think about was getting her revenge. Number 4. Is Sorin the good guy or the bad guy? Wow, that is actually really hard to answer. Sorin might be the most gray character out there, or maybe he's still second to Liliana. I think Sorin always starts with good intentions, but his methods could use some peer review, let's say that. Number 5, who was Sorin when he first appeared, and how does that compare to his most recent appearance? Well, game-wise, Sorin's first appearance was Zendikar, where he was mono-black and he had lots of cruel-sounding things to say in the flavor text of a handful of cards. But even then, he was trying to do something good. He was trying to stop the Eldrazi from getting off the plane. If we're saying his most recent appearance was War of the Spark, then I think it's fair to say that locking away the Eldrazi was his life's work, and that ultimately, that was a failure that consumed him completely. Much like how Edgar didn't really solve the hunger problem by making his family into vampires, Sorin didn't solve the Eldrazi problem by letting Nahiri deal with it. I think we can all learn from that, right? Eventually your past catches up with you. Number 6, what sets did he appear in? Not counting flavor text or references from other characters, and not counting reprints in core sets or special editions, you can find a Sorin Planeswalker card in Zendikar, Dark Ascension, Khans of Tarkir, Shadows over Innistrad, War of the Spark, and Core Set 2020. Number 7, what kind of deck can you most find Sorin in and why? Well, right now, he's in one of the best decks in Standard because Ixalan gave us a ton of vampire cards that synergize with his M20 Planeswalker card, Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. I expect that to change somewhat in the fall when most of those cards rotate out. Or you can use the link in the description below to check out my personal vampire deck that I've been perfecting on Arena. It uses cards from Guilds of Ravnica forward mostly, so it won't be hit as hard by rotation. And I gotta tell you, slapping Mark of the Vampire on a Night Veil Predator makes red decks cry. Number 8, what are mechanics that are special to Sorin? You know what? I hadn't really thought about this, but Sorin's mechanical identity, kind of all over the place. The one thing he seems to have in common across most of his Planeswalker cards is the ability to make vampire tokens. And he also has a few examples of doing damage and gaining life, which is a very vampire thing to do. His signature spell, Sorin's Thirst, also does that. And sometimes he can cheat things into play, either coming back from the graveyard, or in the case of his M20 card, right from your hand. Number 9, where does Sorin fit into the grand scheme of the plane he spends most of his time on? So here's one interesting thing about Sorin. Even though he was until recently the Lord of Innistrad, he doesn't seem to spend a lot of time there. In fact, people who describe him remark that he always acts impatient and gives the impression that he has somewhere else to be. We know that a long time ago he bounced between a bunch of planes looking for a weakness or a way to stop the Eldrazi before settling on Zendikar long enough to build the Hedron network with Ugin and Nahiri. Aside from that, though, we're still left to fill in a lot of the blanks ourselves. Sorin is thousands of years old at this point and has probably had adventures all over the multiverse. He probably has got enemies and maybe even allies on dozens or hundreds of planes by now. But he keeps all that to himself. Hopefully, now that he's out of the wall Nahiri put him in, he'll show up again on a plane that isn't Innistrad, since his home is currently under the control of Olivia Voldaren. Maybe he'll have to recruit some allies to help him reclaim his birthplace, and we'll get to see him kind of tap into this massive network of resources that so far has only been hinted at. Okay. That's everything I can think to tell you about Sorin. We know his origins. We know his attempt to corral the Eldrazi. We know about his dismissal of Nahiri and how that ultimately cost him his lordship of his own plane, not to mention countless lives lost there on Innistrad. We don't know where he's going next, but he's such a fan favorite, I have to assume we'll be seeing him again before too long. Before we close it out here, if you're inspired by Sorin's story and you want to see what he can do for your next deck, please consider using the link in the description below when shopping for Magic singles. You don't even have to do it right now, and it never costs you anything extra. It just lets you show your support for the show so we can keep making these videos for all of you guys, our fans. Now then, let me ask you this. Is Sorin a good guy? A bad guy? Misunderstood guy? Let me know what you think about Magic's planeswalking vampire down in the comments, and then like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya.